I still remember the exact sound the envelope made when I tore it open, a soft, delicate rip that didn't match the violence it carried inside. For a moment, I thought it was a joke. A cruel one, maybe, but still not real. Yet there it was, lying between my trembling fingers and the flickering candlelight of my 31st birthday cake, divorce papers, wrapped in pale pink stationery covered in silver butterflies. A gift from my mother-in-law. A performance for the entire restaurant to watch. People clapped awkwardly when Margaret handed me that envelope. They thought it was something sentimental, jewelry perhaps, or a heartfelt letter. My husband David smiled into his phone camera as he recorded my reaction. His sister Emma leaned closer to get a better angle. The moment was choreographed, rehearsed, and perfectly timed for maximum humiliation. But what Margaret didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd already received something far greater just days before, something that would turn this entire moment upside down. 3 mornings earlier, I'd caught her at our kitchen table surrounded by legal papers. I'd woken early for my shift at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where I'd worked for 3 years. It was quiet, the kind of early where the air still feels soft, untouched by the noise of the day. The smell of coffee drifted through the house, and I expected to find the kitchen empty. Instead, there she was, hunched over a stack of documents, reading glasses perched on her nose, making notes in the margins with a red pen, like a teacher correcting a failing student. When she noticed me standing there, she moved with surprising speed for a woman in her 60s. Her hands fluttered across the table, gathering the papers into a tidy pile before sliding them into a birthday envelope. She smiled too sweetly. "Just a little family paperwork," she said, her tone almost musical. "Something special I've been preparing." Margaret had never called me dear before that morning. Usually I was just David's wife, a nameless accessory she tolerated for her son's sake. The sudden affection in her voice was unsettling, like a snake pretending to hum a lullaby. The envelope itself looked innocent enough, pale pink with embossed butterflies, the words "Happy Birthday" glimmering in silver across the front. She ran her manicured finger along its edge, as if admiring her own handiwork. "I picked this one especially for you," she said, eyes locked on mine. Something in her smile didn't sit right, but I wanted to believe it was kindness. After all, we'd never been close. Maybe she was finally trying. Maybe after 2 years of being the daughter-in-law she never wanted, I was finally being accepted. When David came down a few minutes later, still half asleep, he kissed my cheek before heading out for work. But I noticed the silent look he exchanged with his mother, a flicker of something secret. When I asked what it was about, he just smiled and said, "You'll see. We're planning something special for your birthday." For the rest of that week, Margaret acted like an entirely different woman. She called me to ask about my work schedule twice. She even suggested we hold the birthday dinner at Romano's, the very restaurant she used to call embarrassing whenever David brought it up. "I think it would be meaningful to celebrate where you work," she said. "It's important to acknowledge all parts of your life." The words sounded thoughtful, but her tone was sharp beneath the softness. Margaret had never once shown interest in my life outside of David's orbit. Her change of heart felt rehearsed, but I pushed the doubt away. Maybe she'd finally decided to see me for who I was. Even Emma, who usually treated me like a rival rather than family, started acting strange, texting me smiley faces, volunteering to help plan the event, calling me sis, in that sing-song voice of hers that always meant trouble. I should have known better. But when you've been starved of kindness long enough, even poison can taste like hope. The night before my birthday, Margaret called one last time. "Wear something nice," she said, "but nothing too formal. You'll want to be comfortable for what we have planned." There was a gleam of anticipation in her voice. I mistook it for excitement. I spent hours picking out the perfect dress, navy blue, modest but flattering. I wanted to look polished, worthy. Maybe this was the night things would change. Maybe the woman who had spent years undermining me would finally see me as family. David was unusually tender that evening. He held me close before bed and whispered, "Tomorrow will be a day you'll never forget." He was right about that. When I woke the next morning, sunlight spilled through our curtains, warm and golden, touching everything gently: the framed photo from our wedding, the half-open closet door, the small vase of lilies on my nightstand. I got ready slowly, wanting to savor the feeling of belonging, of finally being accepted. But underneath it all, there was a quiet unease I couldn't name, a whisper in the back of my mind that told me something was coming. That whisper grew louder when I remembered all the moments that had led to this, the snide comments, the sideways looks, the subtle ways Margaret had chipped away at me since the day I joined her family. I used to think her disapproval was about my job. I worked at Romano's as a waitress, and in her world of accountants, lawyers, and polished professionals, that made me a disappointment. She'd once told David, "Your wife works in the service industry. You deserve someone who can elevate you." I'd overheard that conversation by accident, standing in the hallway one Thanksgiving night, as she prayed, actually prayed for her son to come to his senses. That was the night I stopped trying to please her. But even then, I hadn't stopped hoping for peace. And now, sitting in front of my mirror, smoothing out the fabric of my navy dress, I told myself this dinner could be the start of it, a chance to prove that I was more than what she thought. I had no idea that Margaret wasn't planning to give me peace that night. She was planning to destroy it entirely. What she didn't know, though, was that fate had already shifted in my favor. 3 days earlier, while she was probably rehearsing her little speech about family standards, I'd received a call that changed everything. A woman named Jessica Martinez had reached out from the Grand Plaza Hotel, a luxury chain I'd applied to months before and completely forgotten about. She told me that my years at Romano's, the experience Margaret had always mocked, were exactly what they were looking for. They wanted me for a guest services coordinator position. The offer included a salary of $45,000 a year, full benefits, and unbelievably free employee housing just a few blocks from the hotel. For the first time in years, someone saw value in me. Not potential to fix, not flaws to manage, just value. So when I walked into that restaurant on my birthday, I wasn't walking into my execution. I was walking into my freedom. Margaret's envelope might have held my supposed ending, but the truth sitting quietly in my purse that night was something she could never take away from me. The moment I stepped into Romano's that evening, the air felt different. The warm scent of baked bread and garlic butter drifted through the dining room, familiar and comforting. The checkered curtains glowed gold from the setting sun, and for a second I thought maybe this would finally be the night Margaret looked at me like family, instead of a stain she couldn't wash out of David's life. Mr. Romano himself waved from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "Jennifer," he boomed, that warm Italian accent filling the room. "You're not working tonight, right? This must be the birthday dinner you mentioned." I smiled and nodded. "It is. And this is my husband, David, his mother, Margaret, and his sister, Emma." He shook each of their hands with the kind of charm only decades in hospitality could polish. "You picked a wonderful place to celebrate," he said. "We'll take good care of you tonight." Margaret smiled, that practiced social smile that never touched her eyes. "I'm sure you will," she said, her voice syrupy and sharp at once. We were seated at the corner booth, the same one I'd served countless times during busy shifts. It was strange sitting there instead of standing beside it with a notepad in hand. This was supposed to be my celebration, but Margaret's presence filled every inch of the table like heavy perfume. She ordered lobster ravioli, the most expensive dish on the menu, then gave a small smirk when the server wrote it down. David was restless, checking his phone every few minutes. Emma whispered something under her breath that made him grin. I caught bits of nervous laughter between them, the kind of laughter that meant there was a secret I wasn't in on. "You seem distracted," I said softly to David as the appetizers arrived. He gave me that half smile I used to find charming. "Just some last-minute details for your surprise," he said. "You're going to love it." A surprise. The word made me blush a little, thinking maybe, just maybe, this was something sweet. A kind gesture to make up for all the tension of the past 2 years. I let myself believe it. Margaret's voice cut through the small talk like a silver knife. "Jennifer," she said, leaning in with her best imitation of tenderness, "I just want to say how proud I am of you." The words hung in the air for a moment. Unbelievable, proud of me. "You've been working so hard lately," she continued, "trying to improve yourself. Taking those little college classes." She smiled as she said it, the same kind of smile people use when praising a toddler for coloring inside the lines. "Thank you," I said quietly, forcing a polite smile. "It means a lot." Emma coughed to cover a laugh. Margaret turned her attention to the server who'd just refilled our water glasses. "This place really is charming," she said loudly as if rehearsing a line. "It must be fulfilling working somewhere like this. The server blinked, unsure whether it was a compliment or an insult. I knew exactly what it was. I'd heard that tone at every family dinner since the day David introduced me to them. The same tone she'd used at his cousin's graduation party when she announced to a table full of lawyers' wives, "This is David's wife. She works in the service industry." The pause after service industry had been deliberate. That calculated space, a heartbeat of silence, gave everyone time to glance at me, smile politely, and judge. Even now, years later, sitting across from her at the same kind of table I used to serve, I could still feel the sting of that moment. When the main course arrived, I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. Safe topics, light-hearted things. But Margaret had her own rhythm, her own agenda. "So tell us," she said sweetly, "how are your career aspirations coming along?" I placed my fork down gently. "They're going well, actually." She tilted her head, waiting for a sign of failure. "I've been interviewing," I continued. "Something might come through soon." David looked up sharply. I hadn't told him about the Grand Plaza offer yet. I'd wanted to wait for the right moment, the kind of moment that makes people who doubted you finally go quiet. "Oh," Margaret asked, her eyebrows lifting with fake surprise. "Interviewing? For what kind of position?" Her words came with that undertone again, a subtle challenge, an invitation to stumble. Before I could answer, the servers appeared with my birthday cake. The lights dimmed slightly as the familiar song began, a chorus of off-key voices from the staff I'd worked beside for 3 years. "Happy birthday to you." I looked around the restaurant, faces glowing with warmth and laughter. Maria, the head cook, peeked from the kitchen window, waving her flour-dusted hand. Tony, the young waiter I'd trained last summer, stood in the back with both thumbs up. For a moment, surrounded by people who genuinely cared, I forgot about Margaret. I forgot about the cameras, the smirks, the tension. I closed my eyes, made a wish, and blew out the candles. When I opened them again, Margaret was clapping, loud, deliberate claps that cut through the applause of the room. "Oh, we have something special for you," she said, reaching into her purse. "From all of us." She pulled out that pink envelope, the one I'd seen her slide those papers into days ago, and placed it on the table in front of me. "Go on," she urged, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Open it." David raised his phone again, adjusting the angle. Emma's screen glowed beside his, also recording. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. The pink paper shimmered softly under the restaurant lights, and for a fleeting second I almost smiled because I'd forgotten. Because I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this woman had finally done something kind. I tore the envelope open. Legal letterhead, thick paper, cold official ink. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The world stopped. The room, the candles, the clinking of glasses, everything froze in that single horrifying moment. A hush rippled across the tables around us. Mr. Romano's laughter died mid-sentence at the bar. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears as the words on the page burned themselves into my mind. Margaret sat back smiling like a queen who'd just conquered something. David held the phone steady, capturing every twitch of my face. Emma leaned in, her phone lens gleaming. It wasn't a birthday gift, it was a show. For a few seconds I just stared at the papers. Then something inside me, something fragile that had been breaking quietly for years, finally snapped. Not into pieces, into focus. I looked at the signature line. I saw the pen Margaret had placed carefully on the table beside it. I smiled. Then I picked up the pen and signed my name. The ink flowed smoothly, clean and unshaken. I folded the papers neatly, slid them back into the envelope, and placed it beside my plate. "Thank you," I said softly. "This is actually the most generous gift you could have given me." For the first time, Margaret's smile faltered. David's phone wavered. The room had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that hums like the air just before a storm. I reached into my purse and pulled out a different envelope, a white one with a gold seal. I set it gently on the table beside hers. "I have a gift for you too," I said, my voice steady, my heartbeat calm. I looked her straight in the eyes. 3 days ago, I was offered a position at the Grand Plaza Hotel, guest services coordinator. 45,000 a year, full benefits and housing included. I start in 2 weeks. The restaurant erupted. Maria cheered from the kitchen. Tony started clapping. Mr. Romano shouted, "That's my girl!" The applause swelled around us, honest and deafening, drowning out the silence of the people who had come to watch me crumble. Margaret's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her pink envelope, the weapon she'd been so proud of, lay limp beside her plate, harmless now, almost childish. I smiled, feeling the weight of 2 years fall away all at once. I wasn't broken, I was free. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Margaret sat, frozen, her lips parted, her carefully painted smile collapsing into disbelief. The pink envelope that had once glimmered with confidence now looked pitiful beside my untouched slice of cake. I could see her trying to process what had just happened, the way her perfectly choreographed humiliation had shattered into applause for me. David's phone trembled in his hands, still recording, though his expression had shifted from smug anticipation to stunned confusion. He lowered it slowly, as if even the act of filming no longer made sense. Emma stared at me, her phone half raised, uncertain whether to keep recording or hide it. She looked like a child caught watching her own prank backfire. I stood there, the hum of the restaurant vibrating around me, 1,000 tiny details etching themselves into my mind: the smell of tomato sauce from the kitchen, the faint clink of glassware, the quiet gasp from Mrs. Patterson at the next table. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had felt it. Margaret blinked, her voice trembling for the first time since I'd met her. You knew, she whispered. You knew about the papers. I shook my head. No, but I knew about myself, and that's enough. There was a strange, surreal calm settling over me. My hands, which should have been shaking, were steady. My heart, which should have been breaking, was strong and quiet. I'd imagined so many versions of this moment, all of them filled with tears pleading shame. I'd never imagined this one standing tall in front of a crowd, free from the weight I'd carried for 2 years. David finally found his voice. Jennifer, wait, you can't just— I interrupted, my tone sharper than I intended. I already have. I turned toward Mr. Romano, whose kind eyes gleamed with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. Thank you, I said softly, for everything. He stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. You did this yourself, cara mia, he said, his Italian accent thick with emotion. You worked hard. You never gave up. They can't take that away. Maria appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression fierce and maternal. Show them what a Romano's girl can do, she called out, her voice breaking slightly. Make them eat their words. Laughter rippled through the restaurant. Not cruel laughter like Margaret's had always been, but warm, genuine laughter, the kind that fills empty spaces with light. I turned back to the table. Margaret's face was drained of color. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, not powerful, not intimidating, just human. Her voice came out brittle. You're making a scene. I smiled. No, Margaret, you made a scene. I'm just reclaiming the spotlight. Emma swallowed hard, trying to hold my gaze but failing. You can't just walk away like this, she said, her voice shaking. You're part of this family. Was I corrected softly? I was part of this family. Now I'm free from it. David stood, his expression a mess of regret and confusion. You really think you can just leave after everything? Yes, I said, especially after everything. He opened his mouth again, but the sound of the restaurant's applause drowned him out. My co-workers, my friends were still cheering. Tony had climbed onto a chair, raising his glass of soda like a toast. To Jennifer, he shouted for turning trash into treasure. The room erupted in laughter and clapping. Even a few customers I'd never spoken to before joined in, tapping their glasses against plates. I could feel the energy, a collective sense of justice humming in the air. Margaret's hand twitched toward her purse, as if she could somehow stuff the moment back inside it. But it was too late. Her pink envelope, her masterpiece of cruelty, had become a relic of her own undoing. I leaned down slightly, meeting her eyes. You know, Margaret, I said quietly enough that only she could hear, you were right about one thing. I did need to improve myself. I just didn't realize that meant improving my life without you in it. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. I picked up my purse and stood tall, feeling the room's warmth at my back. Mr. Romano, I said, turning to him with a smile that felt real for the first time in months. Thank you for letting me celebrate here. I couldn't have imagined a more perfect ending. He bowed slightly. No, my dear, this is your beginning. I walked out to thunderous applause. The bell above the door chimed softly as I stepped into the cool evening air. The sound felt like freedom, a small metallic echo of everything I'd just reclaimed. Outside, the night was still, the sky a deep indigo, scattered with the faint shimmer of city lights. I stood for a long moment, just breathing. The weight that had lived on my chest for so long, the heaviness of trying to be enough, was gone. Inside the restaurant, I could hear faint murmurs as the family scrambled to recover, but I didn't care. They were ghosts now, people from a chapter I'd already finished reading. When I finally started walking toward my car, each step felt like a promise. I thought about the job waiting for me, the apartment that would soon be mine, the future that wasn't built around anyone else's approval. 2 weeks later, I stood in the gleaming marble lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel, wearing a crisp navy uniform that matched my confidence. My name badge read, Jennifer Walsh, Guest Services Coordinator, my name, my identity restored. Jessica Martinez greeted me with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Jennifer," she said. "I think you're going to fit in here beautifully." For the first time in years, I believed her. The air smelled of fresh linen and polished wood. Guests moved gracefully through the lobby, and I caught my reflection in one of the gold-framed mirrors, poised professional radiant. I wasn't the woman who used to cry over rejection emails or tiptoe around her husband's mother's criticism. I was someone new, someone whole. At night, from my apartment window in the employee residence, I could see the city lights stretching endlessly. I'd stand there with a cup of tea thinking about that pink envelope, about how something meant to destroy me had ended up setting me free. Sometimes I still replay that night in my head. The music, the laughter, the stunned silence. Not because it hurts, but because it reminds me how far I've come. Margaret's cruel little performance didn't ruin me. It revealed me. And that's the beautiful thing about karma. Sometimes it doesn't wait years to show up. Sometimes it walks right into a restaurant, sits across from you with perfect posture, and watches you hand your enemy her own downfall wrapped in pink paper and silver butterflies. I never saw Margaret again after the divorce. David tried to call once, then twice, but I never picked up. There was nothing left to say. Now, when I think of them, it's not with anger. It's with gratitude. Because in trying to destroy me, they built the bridge to my freedom. If you've ever been made to feel small, remember this. You don't have to fight to earn respect from people who refuse to see your worth. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living the life they said you couldn't. If my story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, not just for me, but for every woman who's ever been told she wasn't enough. And if you've ever found strength in your own pain, tell me in the comments below. Your story might be the one that saves someone else.